Hello, welcome to a little tutorial on logos, ethos, and pathos, which are some of the aspects of rhetoric. Rhetoric is the ancient art of persuasion, convincing someone. We'll often use the term argumentative or argument in this class. So we are kind of, although persuasion and argument are slightly different, we're basically going to say those are the same thing. You're trying to persuade somebody, so you're arguing to get them onto your side. So logos, ethos, and pathos are Greek words. You would probably put them in italics if you wrote them to designate them as foreign words. Rhetoric, in fact, does go back to ancient Greece, which is the cradle of Western civilization, Greece and then Rome. And rhetoric is the art of persuasion, the art of trying to convince someone to be on your side. Philosophers would meet in the agora or the assembly or the marketplace, and disciples would gather around them. This painting by Raphael pictures a lot of the ancient teachers and their disciples gathering around them. In those days, we remember even Jesus had disciples, and so he used this teaching method. Today we would have more organized classrooms, but they were much less structured. The agora remains today still in Greece, or the ruins of it, and they would teach about rhetoric and would use it to persuade their audiences to their side. Plato was a famous Greek philosopher, of course. He thought of rhetoric as being kind of sketchy, so he thought of rhetoric as being just a bunch of words trying to convince somebody, kind of like a politician just spouting off, using emotion, using false statistics. He saw rhetoric as kind of immoral. But Aristotle, his student, came along and kind of resurrected or made rhetoric into something more scientific. He's the one who came up with logos and ethos and pathos, and he said that no, rhetoric was actually just the art of persuasion, and it can be used in a good way as well as in a bad way. In fact, Aristotle taught Alexander the Great to properly argue and perform a public speech. And that was the important thing in those days, to speak in the Senate or to speak before other people, to make an army do what you wanted them to do. You would use all of these appeals. It's also the foundation of democracy and humanities. In America, we depend on debate and reason in order to choose our leaders. We are in the midst of a presidential election in which there will be debates between the candidates and the vice presidential candidates. This is an aspect of your education also, because you're getting a humanities degree, meaning you're learning a wide variety of topics, including things like English and rhetoric. And those things are designed to make you be a good citizen, so that when you vote, you'll be voting in a correct and a good way. You'll not be swayed just by false reasoning, but by good reasoning. So the more you understand logos, ethos, and pathos and argument, the better citizen you will be, is the idea behind that. So Aristotle, in about 300 before the Common Era, that's 300 before Christ was born, or we think Christ was born, wrote The Art of Rhetoric. In it, he established 3 methods of persuasion. And they kind of balance each other, they bounce off of each other, they overlap, but there's 3 basic elements of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos. Really, as you hear or read any argument, you should ask yourself, is the argument really persuasive? And to whom is the argument persuasive? Who is my audience? For example, you go in a car sale lot and the car salesman says, sit down in that new car right there. Oh, you look good. The girls are going to be all over you if you drive that car. Is that a persuasive argument? It might be if you're a millionaire and you don't care about money, but if you're a college student with debt, you might say, I'm more worried about gas mileage and efficiency. But it's kind of a fallacious argument to make you want that car. It's using emotion. But argument is all around us. It's not only in the election, but even in the grocery store, even in the dorms. In each of our classes, there's arguments being made. You go to a grocery store and you walk down the cereal aisle and they're shouting at you, buy me, buy me, buy me. And they're using logos, ethos, and pathos. They may be very reasonable. I'm the healthiest cereal. They may be very ethical. I'm the cereal eaten by Michael Jordan. They might be a very emotional cereal. Well, I'm just fun. I'm Cap'n Crunch. So all of these appeals are all around us all the time. It's great to be able to recognize them and analyze them. So we have ethos, which is related to the speaker, and that's his ethics or morals. Now, ethos and ethical are actually two different words, but they kind of are often used together. So the ethos of a speaker is he ethical? Is he honest and moral? Do we trust him? Does he have credibility? In writing for papers in English, we ask, is he a reputable scientist? Does he have a PhD? Does he work at Harvard or Colorado University? Has he written papers? We're looking for his ethos. Pathos is toward the audience, and it is stirring the audience's emotions, moving them to fear or pity or patriotism or joy or sadness. Logos is using logical reasoning. We can see the word logical there. But logos means just word. So it's the message. Is the message reasonable? Does it follow in logical lines? Or is it a fallacy? So we can establish what's called the rhetorical situation, in which we have a speaker, a message, and an audience. The speaker, we would be asking about his or her credibility. That would be ethos. The message, we're asking about its reasonableness. That would be logos. And the audience, we're asking about their emotions. That would be pathos. An easy way to remember this is the rhetorical triangle, in which we have three corners: logos, ethos, pathos, related to the speaker, the message, or the appeal. Or we could say the writer, the reason, and the audience. There were other words that Aristotle used, and you'll see some of these in your textbook, like kairos, decorum. Kairos means time, so it's the timeliness. Is the argument up to date? Is it timely? And that's also important in writing. The TRACE acronym, easy way to remember it, TRACE, text, reader, author, which is logos, ethos, pathos. And then two new words for you here are constraints and exigence. Constraints are those underlying warrants, ideas, beliefs, biases, ideologies that people have. For example, in the presidential election, if you're already a Democrat or Republican, you may have underlying constraints. You may have religious constraints. You may have constraints toward a certain football team. You may have constraints toward how you were raised. Often we don't even realize our own constraints. And that's the problem today, is we have two silos, two sides of the argument, And often they don't even realize that they are kind of raised or kind of surrounded by only those constraints. It's helpful to see that there are other constraints out there. And exigence is the signal out there in the world that something needs talking about, something needs discussion. For example, a crash on a snowy highway, we need to talk about the snow tire laws. A movie maker decrying violence in film, we need to talk about violence in film and have a discussion about it. Riots going on in Seattle, we need to have a discussion about police and protesting and whether that's the same as rioting. What's happening in the world that makes us want to discuss something? For our papers, we read a book or a text and we say, what's happening in this text that I need to discuss? So the three are ethos, where the speaker has to establish moral credibility, and hopefully they don't have an ulterior motive. They're not a liar or a cheater or a false preacher. But we know, for example, that preachers often get caught. Politicians often get caught saying things that were not true. They were thought to be ethical, but their ethos was not strong. Do you believe this man in the white coat just because he has a white coat? Or is he the proverbial, I play a doctor on TV, I played Doogie Howser, so I should be reliable? Is an athlete reliable in persuading you to buy a television? Is a singer reliable in persuading you to use beauty products? Maybe she is. If that's part of her career, she may really know about them. But that's a judgment for you to make. Does a rapper really know about credit and debit? Does Ronald Reagan, before he was president, know about cigarettes? Do we buy these cigarettes just because we like Ronald Reagan? Or is he really an expert on it? Of course, this was before he was president. He was just a movie star in those days. Pathos is very emotional. We often see starving situations, starving children. Pathos can be easily misused because people are very prone to emotion. We're kind of more prone to emotion than we are to logic. And so be very careful about emotional appeals. For example, Biden in his convention, it was shown that he helped a boy that stuttered, and it was a very emotional appeal. This boy made an appeal. He helped me with my stuttering. Well, that may be true. It's very emotional. It might even bring a tear to our eye. But does that mean that Biden should be president? Trump often appeals to patriotism, just to be fair and go on the other side. Just feeling very patriotic, does that mean he's a good manager of the country? Emotion can be used to talk about global warming, the poor penguins dying. Emotion can be used about saving animals. I've gotten caught up in watching some of these dog stories about how the dog is homeless and full of fleas and sad, and nobody has loved it, and somebody takes the dog and loves it and rehabilitates it and brings it back, and it becomes this beautiful, happy dog. It's a great story, tear-jerking, but should I really give my money to that necessarily? And of course, sad, starving children with big eyes. It's very emotionally appealing and can get people to contribute money to things like UNICEF. The third one is logic or logos or reason. This is appeal to the intellect, more to the brain instead of the heart. It uses numbers and statistics, uses quotes from authorities, that have done studies. And it also may use just reasoning. If this is true, then this must be true. For example, on this mouthwash here, it's pretty logos oriented. It's #1 dentist recommended, if you believe that. It strengthens teeth, rebuilds an animal, prevents cavities, kills bad breath, freshens breath. Those are some pretty logical reasons. This is an interesting poster. Of course, it has a good ethical ethos appeal. You got to believe Smokey Bear, right? He's not real. And we've got to be scared for the little baby bears about to be burned. That's emotional pathos. But a little logic there. Only you can prevent the madness. And it's true that 8 out of 10 forest fires are started by humans. So there is some reason there also. There are some things you just can't afford to gamble with. So very emotional about your teeth, but it's also the dentist's choice for fighting cavities, which might lend some logos. This talks about democracy is about public debate. We get into arguments. We become seekers of relevant information, and we should take in information with critical thinking. And this is part of that citizenship of being able to critically think about things and to think about the logos, ethos, and pathos. So the 3 appeals. Is someone trustworthy? Here we see Martin Luther King. And are they educated, reliable, credible, honest, and fair? Sometimes we think somebody's really ethical, like Jerry Falwell, and then we find out that he's been involved in some kind of sexual affairs, which would be the opposite of his religion. Pathos, here's the dog with the sad eyes. Love, pity, justice, patriotism, hope, jealousy, anger, fear, any emotion that can be awoken in the audience. And then logos could be case studies, cause and effect reasoning, authority, analogies, good comparisons, statistics, or anecdotal stories, that is, personal stories that you know. So we want to blend these 3 in our papers, and we want to, as we read a text, we want to unwind the 3 and see how the author uses them. How do they use their credibility? How do they use emotion? And how do they use logic and reasoning? As you read a text, you'll want to think about these 3, how they're used, whether they're used in an honest way or whether some are left out, or whether they appeal in a correct and a way that's not full of fallacies or false appeals. So we see here in the middle there, as the king, I know all roads lead to Rome. It's the king, it must be true. So that's an example of ethos. You'll become dissatisfied in life if you don't take this opportunity. Well, I don't want to be dissatisfied. There's the emotional pathos appeal. And then logic, we should move production to Singapore. Manufacturing are cheaper. That's logic, that makes sense. Also, we should fire Gary. He texts during meetings. Maybe not so logical. Unfortunately, America's become kind of like shooting at each other, and this is not good use of logos, ethos, and pathos. We get over-emotional, we use false statistics, we have speakers that aren't credible, and we begin to just yell at each other and have ad hominem, or attacking the human or the person instead of using reason. And we need to guard against that to help our system be stronger. Just another example, a baby, very pathos-oriented argument. Another baby, seems like babies really work, along with beautiful women and pets. Oh, the Hulk drinks milk. I've got to drink milk. A baby could be hurt in an accident, so slow down. This one's very emotional. Wow, we're just like shooting somebody with cigarettes. But notice the list is very logos oriented from studies. It wrinkles your skin, it reduces stamina, it causes stroke, it's addictive, it causes blood pressure, emphysema, gum disease, cancer, smoking kills. Why bother starting? And finally, well, you've got to believe Santa, right? If he gives you a cigarette. So before we knew more about cancer and cigarettes, some of the ads were pretty amazing. So here's Santa, like, give cigarettes for Christmas gifts. Pretty amazing. So that's a little intro to logos, ethos, and pathos. And as you read a text, you'll want to use those to kind of analyze and break down how that text uses these and whether you think it uses them in proportion and whether you think it uses them fairly and whether it convinces you of their thesis and their argument with good evidence. So thanks for listening.